This is Eileen Griffin with the Heartland View from the Heartland Daily News, bringing you information and analysis about public policy stories that affect your life, your health, your freedoms, and the nation's economy. Today we're going to focus on the nation's economy, and more specifically, we're going to talk about your money. Why? Well, because there's a lot of public policy that's coming around and being proposed that's going to cost a lot of your money. So we're going to talk a little bit about the infrastructure proposal. We're going to talk about a feature story from economist Stephen Moore about spending. And we're going to start with an overview of the economy and what's happening now. So currently, as you know, we've said many times, inflation's been out there. Well, inflation is coming to the front door. So inflation is now upon us. We're seeing dramatic increases in consumer prices. Year over year, we're seeing about 5% in total. In terms of consumer goods, if you take out energy and food, you're looking at about 4%. That's still a significant increase. It's the highest we've seen in about 10 years. So again, no surprise, we've been predicting this and forewarning you about it, but it is here, so be aware we've got inflation out there. Also, what else is happening here? We've got unemployment starting to drop a little bit, not a whole lot of change. There's still a lot of people sitting out there collecting additional unemployment checks. The government's continued with this subsidy. Many states have rejected it, but there are still some states that are paying that out of the federal stimulus. So one comment on that, the math might make sense to stay home a little bit longer to collect that paycheck, but sometimes the detriment to the individual, to the employee, is losing skills, losing opportunities, and just work behaviors that start to deteriorate. So if you know anybody that's sitting on the sidelines and waiting, spread the word. Encourage them that it may not be beneficial to wait. Go on back to work. Now, the stock market. So the stock market continues to fly high. Stocks are still very enticing. It looks really good right now, but as we've said for quite some time, the stock market is overvalued. So that overvalued is in large part due to the Fed continuing to pump money into the system. So that's that artificiality that continues to keep that stock market pumping. So we know at some point we could be headed for a correction, potentially a dramatic one. So that's the quick overview of the economy. Now we're going to move along into talking about your money and what the federal government's proposing. The Biden budget has been out. It's been out, put in proposal form. And one of the things that you'll see is a dramatic increase in several agencies. So federal government agencies, he's proposed quite a bit more money into those agencies. So if you like big government, you're going to get your big government. If you don't like big government and you like keeping more of your money, then you're not going to be real happy with this proposal. Particularly the fact that he's going to add an awful lot of money to the IRS budget. So the IRS budget has been completely, dramatically increased. So he's got a fair amount of money going in there, $13.2 billion. That's a large increase. It's about 10.4% over this year's appropriation. And that translates to about 87,000 new IRS agents. Now, why should that concern us? Well, let's think about this. First of all, the expense. So if we're adding additional people to the IRS budget, additional employees, additional government workers, we're increasing several agencies' budgets. Where is that coming from? Well, it's coming from us. So it's our taxpayer money that's to fund this continued expansion and growth of government. So that's a concern. So second of all, we also know that additional IRS agents means they're going to be looking at doing more audits. So that becomes disruptive to a lot of businesses and individuals. Now, John Kasakian, the head of the IRS under President Barack Obama, told the New York Times that the funding increase is unnecessarily generous. He said, quote, "I'm not sure you'd be able to efficiently use that much money. That's a lot of money," end quote. Well, it is a lot of money. Now, how is he justifying this? Well, the Biden administration is justifying that expense because they claim and they propose there'll be a dramatic increase in tax revenue as they go after these tax cheats. So with this anticipated raise of revenue, increasing revenue, it's not clear how much it actually will be. So the Biden administration anticipates far greater tax revenue with this enhanced enforcement. But the Congressional Budget Office forecasts a much smaller return on this funding increase. They're projecting that $40 billion in increase to the IRS budget will yield about $103 billion in additional revenue. So the net's of only about $63 billion. Not anywhere near what the Biden administration claims they'll see in terms of increased revenue. So all of this increased money also means more enforcement. So more enforcement means more intrusion, government intrusion into your life and into your money. So one of the things that's been proposed as part of this increased expansion of the IRS is to get access to bank records. So they're going to enforce and require banks to provide customer transaction records to the IRS. So that's a little bit concerning. That's your privacy. I would say that's not a particularly customer-friendly bank policy. They won't have a choice, it sounds like. But anyway, that's part of the plan. So former Democratic hopeful, presidential hopeful, and Senator Elizabeth Warren, as you can imagine, she's all on board with this. So she wants more IRS agents. She's been asking for this for quite some time. She strongly supports this, and she says this will fix the presumed racial disparities in enforcement. And it'll go after wealthy Americans, she says. So she says, quote, For too long, the wealthiest Americans and big corporations have been able to use lawyers, accountants, and lobbyists to avoid paying their fair share. And budget cuts have hollowed out the IRS so it doesn't have the resources to go after wealthy tax cheats. End quote. Now, Garrett Watson, a senior policy analyst at the Tax Foundation, says the plan is to look for tax evaders, but that's not really the whole story. The biggest problem and a solution for tax evaders would be to make the tax code simpler. He says that right now the problem is it's so complicated and confusing. A lot of it is just mistakes. It's just errors that they can't quite figure out what to do. And it's not necessarily an intentional evasion. It's just confusion. And he says basically if what you're going to do is you're going to get bank records and try to increase your information from the banks, well, that doesn't cost the IRS anything. They could do that for absolutely free. So why again do we need this increased budget? Well, if we didn't increase the budget and we just did this reduction of the tax code, elimination of the tax code, reduction of the complexity of the tax code, not only would it make it easier for everyday Americans to do their taxes, but it would probably make it easier for the IRS agents to process these things. So why wouldn't they come up with that solution? That solution probably wouldn't cost any additional tax dollars, certainly wouldn't require 87,000 additional IRS agents, and it would be better use of your taxpayer dollars, yours and mine. I wonder why they wouldn't come up with that solution. All right, so I'm looking for good news for our money. I think we found it. We found some good news for money if you happen to live in Michigan or one of these Midwestern states. So if you live in Michigan, you've got some good news. The legislature in Michigan has come up with a bipartisan proposal to find ways to reduce companies moving over state borders. So what's been happening in the past is if you live in one of these Midwestern states, if you want to have a company move over to your state, you entice them with tax breaks or other incentives. And Michigan has said, you know what, this is silly. We're paying for people to move about a 20-mile difference and to uproot an entire company for a tax savings that's really coming out of our taxpayers' pocket. Go figure. So they've proposed working with other states in this Midwestern group, coming up with a coalition and coming up with a process to say, we're not going to try to steal each other's corporations. We're not going to give them tax breaks that comes out of all of our citizens' pockets. And instead, we're going to have an agreement amongst ourselves that we're going to watch out for our taxpayer dollars and make sure that we're doing what's in the best interest of the taxpayers, not just in the corporations. And in the meantime, you're really not achieving anything if they're constantly picking back and forth from one state to the other. So that sounds pretty smart, don't you think? That's a pretty smart plan. What do you like about it? I like bipartisan, cooperative nature amongst different states, and looking out for taxpayer dollars. Looking out for our money. That's good politics. So moving on now with your money and how your money is going to pay for the Biden administration infrastructure plan. So as you know, there is an infrastructure plan that's out there. It still has not been approved by the Republicans. It's something that Joe Biden is currently trying to get Republicans to the table on. But there's an article written by economist Stephen Moore. It's on heartlanddailynews.com. And he goes into some detail about what ways there could be that are much more effective and far less costly, at least in terms of additional spending, to cover this infrastructure bill. So what he says is, congressional Republicans right now are holding the line. They're basically saying, no way, we're not going to support this, not because we don't think infrastructure needs improvement, but because we don't approve this enormous expense. So all of the elected officials need to be good fiscal stewards of our money. We support that. So as much as we support having infrastructure, why can't our elected officials look at a responsible way to pay for it? And it turns out the bill to fix the roads and bridges and modernize the water and sewer systems and all these other things that are really part of the real infrastructure, upgrading ports and airports, not some of the other things that have been thrown into this bill, but those specific needs in terms of infrastructure can be handled without spending additional money. So West Virginia Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito has been negotiating with the Biden team, and she pointed all this out. She pointed out that there's a lot of money already appropriated that can pay for this infrastructure. We don't need to approve another round of enormous expenses. So if we take the $1 trillion plus spending in the Biden plan that subsidizes wind, solar, and other things, take that out, then what's left is what's really required to fix bridges, repair roads, all the real traditional hardcore infrastructure needs that are out there. So that comes to about $600 billion. So $600 billion doesn't sound like a lot, but if you look at what's already out there, an economist even more points this out. There's a lot of money that's already been appropriated that we can basically just reallocate. So right now we've got all this money that's still from the COVID relief bill that was approved in March, but thanks to President Trump's Operation Warp Speed, we have the vaccine, COVID is on the run. Why do we still need all of this COVID relief money out there? Can it not just be reallocated? Why not? So why not use this money for infrastructure and more identify specific areas of this COVID relief bill that could provide the funding necessary to have the infrastructure that we all think is needed? So he says 4 pots of money. Basically, first of all, the state, we'll go through them quickly. The state bailout, all this money that went to the states, they didn't really need it. Many of them flat out said, hey, we don't need it. But a lot of the money is now going into wasteful projects, things that aren't particularly necessary, or it's just sitting around. Why? Why not use it for infrastructure? So the state bailout, unnecessary. Let's move that money someplace else. Immediately eliminate this $300 weekly supplemental unemployment benefits. As we've said before, it's only dragging down the economy at this point. What's happening is people need to go back to work. And they're not because the government is paying them additional money to not work. We need them back to work. Stop with this additional payment. Congress could just cancel the program. They could do it overnight and save $150 billion, reallocate that to infrastructure. Biden also gave $129 billion for government schools that have been closed down for most of the year due to COVID. So these schools are going to get payments that run through 2028. So why? Why do we need to do that? How about we reallocate that money, take it back, and Morris says, go ahead and pay it this year. But even if you pay it this year, that's $6 billion, but you can return $123 billion to allocate to infrastructure. Makes sense. And then, of course, he talks about what we've always hoped for, and we always have hope and expectation for, but to cut wasteful spending. So stop with all the government waste, these ridiculous programs and projects that make no sense to most people. Common sense, take a common sense approach. Demand that government be run like a business. Businesses wouldn't tolerate all this wasteful spending. Businesses require to prove return on an investment. Why can't the government do the same? Run the government with efficiency. Emphasize efficiency, cost reduction, budget, tighten the budget, look for good cost savings, and make sure that we're looking out for the taxpayer dollar, the bottom line. Be good fiscal stewards of the money. It's not a lot to ask. So there's general consensus that the safety of roads and bridges is a priority. General consensus across the board. And there's bipartisan agreement on the need, but this abyss of difference isn't going to close. Right now, Republicans are holding the line for fiscal responsibility. Democrats just need to join them, all together prioritizing your money. So that's it for this week's Heartland View. That's all we've got to talk about your money, but there's a lot happening with your money out there. Important to pay attention. If you'd like to see more details on these stories as well as many others, please go to the website heartlanddailynews.com. And if you'd like to find out more information and support the organization that's trying to keep you informed, please go to heartland.org. You can donate right off the website. Thank you as always. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. Have a great week.